spotlightonpodcast.com/store is the place to go to get a Spotlight On collectible for the music and arts lover in your life, or maybe even yourself. Go to spotlightonpodcast.com/store today. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on Roberto de Gioia of the German jazz supergroup Web and his group's collaborator, the songwriter and producer Max Herre. Web's fifth album is also their second with Max, and it's appropriately titled Web Max 2, out now on Compost Records. This is an exciting, genre-bending album that includes appearances from Los Angeles-born percussionist and producer Carlos Gabriel Nino, hot on the heels of his own work on the new Andre 3000 album. This record is the complete package, from the striking cover art to every well-placed organic and synthetic musical touch. Roberto, who is a repeat guest of Spotlight On, and Max are both fun, engaging, and deeply committed artists. I think you'll enjoy the talk. So I spent the weekend immersed in the new album, and it's so good. It's so good. It's right in the target of what I like to listen to, but also new and fresh enough that it doesn't feel like something I've heard before. And it's really just, I'm so eager to spend more time with it. I'm actually looking forward to buying it on vinyl because I feel like it's going to sound terrific.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate. Yeah, it's so good to hear. So,
do you listen to it? Do you listen to your own work?
While we're doing it, we listen to it a lot. It went to a lot of phases. Like we had some of the songs had 24 mixes or so to it. Like it was like this kind of album that really evolved
rather than mixes.
Versions while we were doing it. So it was really a lot of trial and error this time. It was, other than the album before, it's more like a producer's album. We really tried out things and tried to explore different paths and angles for each song. So they really grew. Not all of them. Some of them, like Provincial Journey, for instance, was pretty much what it is now from a very early stage. But some other songs really, like they went through phases, and they are also different, like soundscapes. Yeah, we tried out a lot of things.
So I'll go back and ask, do you ever put on your own music and for the enjoyment of listening to it, or can you not do that?
I've listened today. I listened today because I had to decide what we're gonna play live. Believe it or not, I have to learn the songs from scratch, because when you do it, when you record it, and when you find it, it's instantly there or not, and then it disappears. It's like a child you feed. It has nothing to do with oneself any longer. So it's really like a second person right in front of you, and you look at it. Today, actually, I listened to it, and I had to listen to, and I liked it, but it's strange. I know it, like your kid, like your son, you know it, you know him, but still there are surprises, oh, wow. This was happening. Oh, I can't remember this color, or, this happens. Yeah. It's like really like a child, at least to me, to myself. I don't know, Max.
Sometimes, yeah. And like when albums are really new, I like to listen back, and then like they disappear for a while. And then sometimes a couple of years later, or just like Roberto said, and you're rehearsing for a show, so you listen back to it. And it's really interesting for me, like with these, like the Web and Web Max albums. I'm not a performer like that on these albums. I do albums where I'm writing lyrics for, and then I perform. So I really have to deal with myself and my persona as an artist on these albums. And it's way different than to listening to Web Max, where I'm producing and I'm playing little bits and pieces, but I'm not like a major like performer on the album, which is easier for me to listen to it just as music and with a certain distance that's way more enjoyable for me than ask myself, who am I? What did I tell? Did I talk about? How did I sound? And yeah. So yeah, at this phase, at least, I really love listening back to the album. I think, yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
When you said earlier, Max, and it's something I also read in, I think, the press release about the record, that it's a producer's album or more of a producer's album. I wasn't entirely sure how to interpret that. When I think about a producer in the context of, I guess, any music, but specifically instrumental music and jazz, there's different poles of types of producer. I think of like a Teo Macero, who's like a wizard in cutting up tape and copying and pasting. And I would imagine he'd be very comfortable in the modern age if he were around with computers and digital capabilities. And then maybe someone like a Rudy Van Gelder, who's almost more of an engineer and is just searching for the sound. So I wonder, and I'm sure there's a spectrum in between. What does that mean for you that it's a producer's album?
Different things. All of what you said probably as well, like finding the right sounds and playing around with it. What I mean in comparison to the last album, where we went to the studio with the band and we played takes on music that Roberto and I had written before. So it was really about that, sitting there and discussing what to play on the songs and what instruments should play on it. And with this, it was more like, as we were evolving it in the studio, a lot of the times the musicians not being around, but Roberto playing a lot of the stuff, bringing different people in at different times and stages. That's what I mean on the one hand. And then also producer's album in the quest of finding like a narrative to it. Like, I think with the last one, we really had a certain idea of what like the album as a whole should sound like. And now we had different paths to explore. And then we needed kind of a narrative that would hold it together. And it was more like thinking of, okay, what do we want for the album? Which paths do we want to explore? But also, where do we not go this time? What we need in order to still being at an album and holding it together and giving it a certain overall idea or meaning.
Roberto, was the narrative for this record Munich?
We initially planned 3 albums, which all came together in this one album. We thought we could make 3 albums with different focuses, like a drum album, crowd jazz album, like Embryo, Amandül, the 60s, 70s German Munich bands, which I am familiar because I'm from Munich and I know some people. I met them. I met Mel Waldron, the John Coltrane piano player in Munich in 86. I said hello to him once, which was the greatest honor. And he was playing around with the Embryo guys then. And the other was the songwriting album. And by working on the albums, we made a distillation of the best moments and put it together. It tells the story, to answer your question, with a narrative of Munich. It's out of our handwriting, our feather, we wrote the music, and that's what keeps the album together. Because there's so many different styles actually on this album, which is a very contemporary and modern way of listening to music. On the other hand, it's a total concept album for ourselves because the songs move from classic songwriting, it's like the first song, then to a free jazz type of, to an African 1974 type of beatbox with 2 guitars and an organ. So the styles are totally different, but within the development made this possible so that we don't feel we put together meaningless tunes, but every song has its own meaning and keeps the story which we are in line. It tells the story in a certain way of Reihenfolge, in a certain way of
Sequence.
That's very helpful to hear you articulate it that way, because as a listener, I got that, but I don't think I would have been able to say it the way you did. And something that strikes me is the notion of lineage, not only the physical lineage of being from a place, but the way that's expressed through the different styles on this record. You were saying something that what it brought up for me was that the risk of something like that is it could be chaotic and not fit together and be disjointed.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, maybe we'll credit some Max here or something from wearing a producer's hat, or both of you, to be able to navigate that, to make it a coherent whole that touches on all those things. That to me, outside of the playing itself, is one of the triumphs of this record, is the ground it's able to cover and what it's able to convey through those styles. And, you know, let's get the name out of the way. You brought up Coltrane. You said the words Coltrane when you mentioned Mal Waldron. It's just as a funny aside, I know on the last record you had Charles Tolliver on it. I don't remember if I told you this the last time we spoke, Roberto, but years ago, I saw Charles Tolliver with McCoy Tyner.
Wow.
They did 2 nights of the Music of Africa Brass with a big band. And it was just, they did it in New York for 2 or 3 nights at the Blue Note. Incredible. But one of the tracks on the record, I think it's Sixth Dimension, really harkened back to that early 60s Dolphy, Coltrane, when they were just taking in some of the Eastern sound, getting very modal. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the beginnings of the spiritual jazz. That to me was the birth of a lot of this.
The song Sixth Dimension. This was a funny moment. Actually, all the horns, may I show you? The horns are this mellotron, the original.
No kidding.
These are all the horns. So this was an improvisation with saxophone sounds, clarinet sounds. I found this weird saxophone sound, which I didn't remember I have. The old mellotron has frames, sound frames with real tapes in it. You have to change the tapes. And I found this saxophone, which is in the middle of the song. So blah, 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 blah. And I said, this could be any cool tenor player, Pharoah Sanders type of. And I immediately recorded this. And then after this, I played this drum set, which it sounds like a band, but it isn't. And that's what Max puts together, you know, the different elements. And that's his Verdienst, how do you say, of putting these elements together in one to one.
He's an alchemist.
Yeah. He definitely is. Yeah.
But the gold is there already. The gold is.
Yeah. I'm absorbing what you just told me, because after spending so much time with the record, I didn't guess that. I didn't know that was the mellotron, and it's
all the horn in there in this song. All the horns are really this mellotron. Also, a very modern and very antique and early 70s. The mellotron is the krautrock instrument. Is a Munich instrument, which I bought from a guy in Munich, and somehow the history also is involved in this record, in these songs. And also, although this is from 1974, the mellotron, the original, it's a very modern approach, not to fake, but to simulate with modern techniques, computer multi-track recording, to simulate an ancient or a 60s, 70s recording. And this all happens by a vision, or this originates in a vision of how it could have been then. And it comes together how I interpret with my tools the music of then together with Max. That's kind of the basic principle. Also on Perennial Journey, it sounds like a bigger band, but it's all recorded in this tiny little 14 square meter room. This took 50 versions, and the composition is one part. The beginning of the record is this bass and drums part, the bass line. And this originally came in the middle of the song. We had a different beginning. When Max came and said, well, that's not the beginning, that's a middle part. This is the beginning. And so he arranges things in a different way than I hear it. That's where I can respond to him and his ideas and follow this in a certain way. And that's why we work together on actually many projects now. It's really great because the other one knows things which the other one doesn't know. So it's really 4 hands and 4 ears, one person or so. And I'm very thankful to you, Max, that you are around and bear my ideas, which are terrible sometimes, most of the times.
That's not true, but thank you for saying so. But that's not true at all.
Something that Roberto said that I'll also grab onto, and I wanted to say it to you through my filter, which is something that I always loved about not only the spiritual jazz era of the late 60s, early 70s, but what I would call post-spiritual jazz, but where some of those artists went next in their innovations really struck me as being more about arranging and instrumentation. I've had this conversation with a few artists, how a lot of the jazz artists went electric and embraced sort of the path that Miles trailblazed.
Yeah.
But other artists, I think specifically of like a McCoy Tyner, he never really went electric, but was just as innovative because he started to incorporate the African instruments, and his use of arrangement is just, it's stunning. That's something that really struck me on this record, is that in the midst of all this improvisation, there's incredible arrangement work. And I wonder, what did your background in hip hop bring to the table, or how did it inform, how does it inform your work as a producer and an arranger in these other musical contexts, if at all? Maybe you could tell me I'm crazy.
No, it does. It does totally. I think it has a huge impact because, I mean, coming from digging and sampling, it's like you always look for these parts that really have this repetitive moment, like that give you something that's of a mantra of a song. That's what your whole search is about, to find it. And of course, if you play with bands and you work with bands, that's also something that I'm always into, to have like a foundation that is, rhythm and bass line on which everything else can like unfold. And I think that's something that we really explored with this record, also with the last one, like to have something that is really based on a foundation that is sort of holds it together in a way. And that's what I like also about the improvisation. If you have something that is underneath that is really mantric and stable and repetitive, it's spiritual in its own way, because doing it over and over again and finding a groove together within a room and a group of people and sort of evolving through repetition. With a lot of like the spiritual jazz stuff, I love, that's the bass. If you listen, a lot of the Yusuf Lateef stuff, for instance, is very repetitive in a sense that it lays a foundation on which you can, as a musician and as a spirit, you can like unfold and just start exploring. And I think that's something that we really thought of. Like if you bring it back to hip hop, that's what we call, what's the beat, what's the bass line. But I think also like hip hop producers really understood that in a way, that this is something that is appealing. And also we came from playing live a lot with the last record. A lot of the songs on the last record, we ended up playing a bit faster than they were in the record, because we thought, and we saw that people were responding to it physically. You really had the feeling that people are not just, in jazz audiences in Germany, they're often very like stiff and sophisticated and intellectual. And you could feel, all right, this is like, I know from hip hop context, this is something, okay, that really gets in the bodies, the groove, the bloodline of listeners. And And I think that was something that we were really aware with the record, that we wanted that. That was the foundation of a lot of the songs.
I believe that's the thing that was so attractive, going all the way back to the early mid-70s, to a lot of artists that were influenced by what was happening in Germany. It seems to have been something that the German artists and the musicians really uncovered and perfected, which was this notion of using technology, but still creating music with soul. I can recall years ago having an argument with a friend of mine who hates Kraftwerk. He thinks it's the most sterile music ever. And I listen to Kraftwerk and I feel like it's soul music. Several years ago, through a completely different situation, I had an opportunity to meet Ralph. I was working for Warner Music at the time. And when I was introduced to him, he said, Atlantic Records, Aretha Franklin.
Wow.
And that to me completely validated my theory that
that
it was about soul. It was always
Especially
about soul.
the very, these very early beginnings with the flute, the sessions can be seen on YouTube, and they are really very good musicians too. And then they always found the best drum sound and the best vocoder sound, and that's why it sets standards so early, so high, that the whole world in electronic music still sees them as the gods of electronic pioneers, because the highest standards of, without words.
Yeah. Something else they did that's very interesting is when they went back in the 80s and digitized their catalog, I think to a large extent, they rebuilt a lot of the, what we would call stems. They really rebuilt a lot of the tracks. And so when we hear the music now and when younger people are coming to it, they sonically, I don't want to say they enhanced it, but they modernized it. And basically like the preservation or restoration work they did with the catalog then, it made them ideally suited for the digital age. It's really interesting what they, how intentional they were about their catalog as a body of work. But another interesting intersection that I wanted to ask you about, Max, and I promise I won't leave you out, Roberto, is another intersection of hip hop and spiritual jazz, or jazz in general, to me, is sort of the idea of consciousness, and your work being sort of associated with conscious lyrics and message music, if you don't mind me saying it that way.
Mm-hmm.
While we were talking about lineage, there's also this lineage of, of consciousness, of spirituality, of awareness that runs through both of these musics as well. Is that a valid connection or interpretation? And is that something that you're meaningfully aware of and participating in?
I think so, yes. I think the concept of, or the idea, or the knowing about that we all stand on the shoulders of people that came before, that's sort of a sentiment I know I was taught in hip hop in a way, but that obviously goes back to all the music that came before. And I think the idea of seeing ourselves as being a part of a tradition that is so profound, way older, and that also came to be in a certain context, like a social political context, like in a spiritual context, and knowing about it and referring to it. Yeah, I think that's very important to our music. On a perennial journey, my friend Sekou wrote this spoken word part that really brings together the idea that we really, there's a lot of gratitude towards the music that we grew up with, and like the protagonists who were playing and crafting this music.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On right after this break. Did you know that Spotlight On is completely self-funded by the team that produces it? We're looking for ways to keep the podcast self-sufficient without sacrificing the listener experience or the integrity of the show. The best way we could think of was to ask for the support of our listeners. Please consider making a donation to help cover our annual operating expenses. Go to spotlightonpodcast.com and click the word donate. If you can, please do. And if you cannot, please continue to enjoy the show. We're happy to have you as a listener. Thanks. And now, back to Spotlight On. At the risk of deconstructing how you create, and I don't necessarily mean to do that, but do you have to create an environment for the music to come? Is there ritual or practice around that? Or are you more like a workman and you just go to work and start picking up the tools?
Second. The ritual is very early, before your mind is awake. All the work has to be done. And I feel this when I bring my daughter to school, 7:30, and I come back at exactly 7:35. I'm sitting in this room and I'm not really there. All I have to do is not wait for inspiration. It's just do it. And it works many times, but many times it doesn't work. And it's okay. It's like usual work, which I like. It sounds very arrogant, but it's, to me, nothing special because I'm doing it so long and I have fun. Sometimes I don't have fun. Actually, many times you don't have fun when it's already there. And there's so much work. Perennial Journey was there. There was a year almost, or maybe 10 months at least. There were 2 different drum takes from 2 different own session, which 2 different days. And there were 2 months in between the first part, and then it switches to another cymbal. But it's the same cymbal recorded with a different mic on 2 months later. Although the song is there and it's fun, you are not satisfied and you are not happy with the result because it doesn't sound like it should sound. That's the hard part, but which is not fun, but it's okay.
Something that's bringing up for me is, because earlier Roberto made the joke to you, Max, that he has a lot of ideas and they're not all good. I can take that as just being self-effacing, but I could also understand that if you force yourself to work every day, you're going to generate a lot that you just throw away and you say, I'm just working to get to the good one. So I understand that, but there's got to be some that are right on the edge where you say, this has potential if I just keep working at it and sculpting it away and removing or
It's a very
adding.
good example of one track. This number, Max, wie heißt this? I don't even know the titles.
We have so many titles too. Like as I told you, we have a lot of versions and they get different titles. And then at the end, they ask us, okay, what's the record going to be like? And we come up with names that we can't recall in interviews.
The tune with the drum beat, the organ, and the 2 guitars. It's like number 8 or 9 on the record.
Well, let me figure out.
It's a very good example of, and it describes perfectly. Whilst you find it, Max, I will tell the story.
I think we gave it a French name, something French.
I have it. It's called Tsutuma.
Tsutuma, exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Tsutuma. Okay, the number 9 on the record. We had at least 5 total different versions, which did not resemble at all. Total different. With saxophone and piano and with total different tunes even. And I gave up on this tune. We didn't come to the point where we said, Max and I said, this will make it onto the record. So we lost it. And then Max came a few days later. What about this version, number 15 out of 500? And he sent me this MP3 of this version, which is on the record. And I hardly could remember by first listening. And I immediately said, wow, this sounds great. What is that? After 5, 6, 7 seconds, I realized this is the version number 5 of a very early origin of the song. And I immediately loved it. But I didn't like it then. And Max didn't like it then either. He said, no, we have to keep on doing, we have to. And then you come back months later, seeing your own work with a distant view. And then you decide, this is it. This has the potential. And what happened? We just took the MP3. There wasn't even a session. There wasn't even files because I rejected it. I threw it away. I don't collect the failures. I only keep the gold. And this, sometimes it's a really big mistake.
I mean, going back to what we earlier talked about, like your narrative and context and what does a record need in order to be a record and sort of a journey. You listen to it and you feel like, okay, now with this 10 songs, we have the cosmos that we wanted to explore and share with the listeners. So this song made total sense within that context in a version that we thought was like not a path we should further explore at the point we were working on it.
And Lawrence, one more thing, this version, and now I remembered, it is a big assembly or a collection of mistakes, because the organ with the drum beat really broke down after this version. After this beat collapsed and I threw it away, the organ with the drum beat. And I remember I played 2 guitar solos on it. And the first one I didn't like, and the second one I didn't like either. So we had 2 guitars, and I pushed one knob by incident, which 2 guitars at the same time matched together so that I liked them. I liked the version. And that's why I was so insecure, and I sent it to Max, and he wasn't, he said in the beginning. But then after the decision was made, it was good with a different perspective. I think it's more a way of deciding what is good and what is not good, which is not sometimes, doesn't happen in the moment where you create, which is strange with the emotional feelings you have while you're working. So with a different approach and with a distant view and different point of view, you can decide that something was good, which wasn't good 3 months ago.
So what's scary in that, or interesting in that, because I was originally going to ask you, how do you decide when to abandon an idea as opposed to continuing to really work at it and try to find it? But what seems like maybe happens more often than not is you might abandon ideas that actually are good, but you just don't like them in the moment. It's so magical.
Which is good.
We've been collecting music, and it's not like Roberto's, he's throwing some of the stuff away. I keep a lot of the stuff, like in different stages. So, and we've been making music for 16 years now. And it's happened so often that for a certain project or a certain phase, we recall things that we were doing maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and we revisit them. And all of a sudden, something that at the point we enjoyed doing it, but it never really fit like a project we were working on. We find that within a new context, it makes sense. Of course, there's a lot of music sitting there that will never be released, but we are really happy for our own, like I say, bibliothèque or so of music, because sometimes we recall things, or like I have a lot of playlists and I go through stuff that we were working on, or Roberto sent me at some point, some morning, because he's sitting there at 7:35. By 8:15, I have 1 or 2 ideas. Very often by 12 o'clock, he revisited a lot of these things and did other stuff. And that's maybe one thing I could say about him. The magic is in the work that he's putting in there, like constantly. There's a lot of magic in all of the stuff he's doing, but it's always about the story you want to tell. And that's really a sort of a mindset. And that's something that, that comes with talking on the phone or a meeting and listening to music or being inspired by some stuff. That was what this record was about. We've had the idea with the last record was like really to align ourselves within that beautiful musical history of spiritual jazz, and really sort of paying homage to the godfathers and mothers of this music, and also like asking Charles Tolliver to join in, or getting this beautiful poem by Yusuf Lateef and so on. With this record, it was really like, okay, now we had opened ourselves to the world and invited the world to come in. Now we want to sort of like reverse the camera maybe and say, okay, this is where we're from, Munich. This is what's from here. And with the record was mostly done there. So just look around. This is like other influences that we grew up with within that circle of musicians. So like both of the Web Max albums are like these different perspectives of the same lens that is once turned into the world, and then like turn backwards towards like where we sit and where we work. So that maybe that's an overall idea to it.
What will your role be, or what is your role when the band performs live?
I call myself the rhythm piano player. There's a rose and a piano we share, and then there's some electronics. So, but it's mostly like what we talked about. I'm not a piano player, but I'm maybe also through rappers, I'm a timekeeper in a way that I can play stuff like and repeat it. And so I think it's more like the drummer and the bass player and we sort of work on that basis that Roberto and Tony Lakatosh can really like go crazy on.
And Roberto, you mentioned earlier that some of the songs were constructed and how some of the sections I thought were organic instruments are simulated instruments. How does this impact the development of the live program? I mean, are you bringing the Mellotron out, or is Tony going to duplicate those parts? How does that come together?
This would be an enormous action to carry all these instruments from one place. And since you play in Switzerland and in Hamburg, actually the bands then, they did it, and they were smoking, drinking, driving from Hamburg to Switzerland, and they lived it. But these days, they're in the first class, eating schnitzel,
Going to yoga.
whatever, and then you go to soundcheck and, you know, drink still water, 39 degrees Celsius warm to relax, and different. It's so different, and so is the music. The music live is a total different thing for me. It has to work as a live group. We use the songs as a vehicle to express what we can do on a record. And I hope that many artists do this in jazz and pop music, like Prince. You know, I mean, he plays a fucking guitar solo which isn't on the song. You know, he always did perform and did things live. And to be honest, it's very boring if you go to a concert and it's the same shit as on the record. I would fall asleep immediately, especially with this music. Also, grabbing your idea with the arrangements earlier. To us, it's very important not to overload either too many arrangements in a record. It makes the good arrangement, the one good arrangement, weaker. So you decide, okay, Perennial Journey is the arrangement. Then you have the sound and a pre-jazz bass clarinet player called Johannes Anders on the second song, which I love his approach to music. And then you have a ballad or a fast song called The Source of All Things, which is the main groove is played by B-Bull, a friend of mine from Cameroon. He plays it on trees on the floor. And he plays this groove so hard and so great. So every tune has a different focus on the record. And then comes the ballad, which almost sounds like a cineastic, like the intro to a 70s Polanski movie with Faye Dunaway and Peter Fonda. I don't know if they ever played together, but you know, and then the sixth dimension is a weird, free, black star type of darkness, which has to come out, you know, and then you have this. So the focus is always different on each of the songs, which is what I love to hear on a record would be this.
We're not going to play all the songs of the record, I think, live. There's some songs that are really like Perennial Journey, which is really like a composition. You can play it. It doesn't really matter if you have the strings playing or not. So we can really do it well. Then there's songs that are more like of a vibe, and then we decide whether we play. But the catalog now from Web, all the records, and the Web Max, the first one, this is tremendous now. Yeah, there's a lot to pick from. So I think with the tour we're playing now, we're going to play, let's say, 4 or 5 songs from the record where we think that we can play it with a quintet and it makes sense and we can bring a new story alive. And then with the other ones, we don't know if we have to do them. We'd rather pick songs from the Web Max record before.
Mm-hmm. Are the shows entirely the Web or Web Max music, or do standards ever creep their way in, or it's your own music?
No, it's only our own music and the web music of Web. Sometimes we used to play like a composition by the bass player, Christian von Kapphengst. I think Tony Lakatosh also had a song that we, the US player. I think I never played it with you, but it's original music by the group. It's fun. And then also with these guys, sometimes you have a set of 1.5 hours and you decide to play more like you want to show a lot of the composition. So you say, let's play 12 or 14 songs a day. And then there's other days where we say, okay, let's be more free about it. And then we play a song and it's 15 minutes on the same theme, but the band is taking it somewhere. Also for me, I love being part of this, and I learn every night. I learn so much, and I get braver being with them, and it's a lot of fun.
It is with the utmost gratitude and thankfulness that we pay homage to the mystical language of music and to those who have paved the way on this perennial journey of love and universal connection. Sincerity and heartfelt expression are the source of all things, unlocking life's many meanings through testimony and meditation. And to our fellow travelers who have shared their spirit in service of this collective moment, we welcome you. We are all disciples of those who laid the foundation, worshipers of rhythm movements, colors, and tones, students who look beyond the sun, open the doors of the cosmos, utopia, and visions. We bear witness to the eternal light of your body of work as we offer a humble contribution to your legacy.
Something that Roberto said earlier, you use the live shows to do things that you can't necessarily do on record. It's so interesting because it's an inversion of what you hear a lot of other artists say, right? Like they do things on record that they can't do live because they have the tools and the technology and the studio. That's just such an interesting notion. And I think it is true, like Prince was a pop artist. He wasn't going to have a 7-minute guitar solo on his studio take because he wanted to be on the radio, and he had very specific pop goals, but then you go see him live and he had very specific artistic goals. And the way he navigated the two of them, it's just fascinating that I've never quite heard it said that way. So many artists view the record as so precious, and that's the expression of the song, whereas they almost have to apologize for live.
Yeah. Total different story. One is the album which you want to listen, and which shouldn't be too long, I don't know. But on live, you have to give the people different things, different emotions. Actually, very simple.
I think we need a Web Max live album. I think just for me
we'd love
personally.
to do it. We'd love to do it. We had there's several recordings now. I think the Leverkusen Jazz Target was a pretty good recording. We did, and there's 2 setups. I don't know if Roberto mentioned, but we played with orchestras too. We have a friend, Magnus Lindgren, who wrote arrangements to the songs, and we performed it with different orchestras in Berlin with the Babelsberg Film Orchestra, and in Stuttgart with the Opera Orchestra, which is quite good orchestra. It's a bit like when you talk about McCoy Tyner, it's a bit like some of the stuff he explored, where it gets really,
all the strings and everything.
Yeah, orchestral. And I love doing it. It's formatted in a way that Of course, there's parts where this is solos now and they wait for us until they come back in. But it's more of what we would say, what you could compare to, okay, now we're going to play what was on the record. Now we're going to play what is written, in comparison to when we play as a quintet where it's like totally free. And of course, there's some things that repeat because we feel, okay, this worked on one occasion, one night. So maybe we should do it again. It was fun doing it that way. But this is something that always comes with the shows, the concerts, and like when you play some shows in a row, then there's certain things that grow through just doing it and feeling good about it.
But also, if you can improvise, what we can improvise, and why shouldn't we use this tool? You know, it's like in a conversation or telling a joke. You know, this phenomenon, you're telling a joke, it's funny, and a second person comes in, wants to hear the same joke, and you tell it different, and it gets boring. And the third person comes in and you say, this is not funny at all. And it's like music. I mean, I get bored easily by playing always the same licks. And I know I played this, which worked great last night. And I don't want to make the mistake of getting it trapped and copy myself. It's like telling the joke the second time. It has to be spontaneous. That's my nature way of regarding our music as being interesting. If it's not interesting for ourselves, it can't be interesting for the audience.
I think that might be a good place to end our time together. I know we're coming to the end of our hour. I'm just so excited to have the album come out and for the world to hear it, because it's very exciting and satisfying music. And I thank you both for making time today and for making this beautiful album. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Lawrence, bye. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Roberto de Gioia and Max Herre. As always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host and executive producer, Lawrence Perrier. We're produced and edited by Michael Donaldson, with theme music by Q Burns Abstract Message. For past episodes, the bonus tracks blog, our online store, our mailing list, and to make a donation to support our production, visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.